a lot of national security is really about domestic security and shoring up the institutions at home. And you mentioned that that was something that you were reminded of by the late Alice Rivlin, who we both revered and worked with over the years. Could you give us a little bit about why domestic soundness is really important for the national security interest?
Thanks, Bob. Well, two reasons in particular. One, of course, that our modern American military is built on a foundation of a strong economy and a strong science and technology base. You know, we often talk about our troops being the most important part of the military, and again, privileged to be on this podcast with Tim, one of our brave young Americans who served so admirably. But we also benefit from the excellent weaponry and other technology that we send those troops into battle with. I have a good friend at the American Enterprise Institute, Mackenzie Eaglin, who likes to say that we have made two solemn vows with the men and women of our military. One, that will always take care of them, especially while they're serving, but also if they're hurt, when they're veterans, when they may be disabled. A real commitment at the human level to those men and women and their families who serve. But also that we'll give them the best equipment when they go into battle, so that when they fight the enemy, they win and the enemy loses. They survive and the enemy dies, as Mackenzie likes to say with her Georgia lilt, and it sounds better coming from her than from me, but it's quite compelling. We should never forget the importance of modern weaponry, and the conversations about our defense manufacturers are often a little pejorative, and people talk about cost overruns and this and that problem. And of course, we do need to scrutinize and make sure we constantly hold contractors accountable, but they do build the best weaponry in the world here in the United States that our troops go into battle with. And that's a reflection of the strong economy and technology base that we still have here in America. That's reason number one. Reason number two about why the soundness of our economy and our polity really matter is that if we don't all, or at least most of us, buy into this notion that American leadership is good for us in our own lives, then you can see populist politicians, whether Donald Trump or maybe someone on the left or some future politician, basically argue it's time to pull our commitments away from overseas theaters. It's time to end our alliances, end our trade agreements, and really focus on the American middle class and make sure they don't get left holding the bag for all these overseas commitments that we've built up in this era of globalization. Now, I think that's a false argument. For one thing, most of the struggles of the middle class, as I've understood them from people like you and Alice and Maya McGinnis and Ben Bernanke and many others who have explained to me what's happened to our economy over the last few decades, it's more about automation than globalization per se. There have been times where trade agreements or overseas commitments have been done on poor terms, and we need to get tougher in some of our trade agreements. But for the most part, the struggles of the middle class today are not fundamentally about our overseas engagement. Nonetheless, even if that's objectively true, to the extent the middle class in America feels squeezed, feels like it's not being adequately heard or protected by policymakers in Washington, and those same policymakers are flying off around the world to help allies, whether in security terms or economic terms, that's going to create a backlash, and it's going to create, really an erosion in the consensus that we've had since World War II about how the United States needs to stay engaged in the world. My colleague Bob Kagan at Brookings writes about how we could maybe revert back to the kind of attitudes that were so prevalent in the 1920s and 1930s, when we had an isolationist America that was so focused on its own problems or opportunities that it ignored what was happening in Europe as Hitler was rising. And next thing you know, we have to go fight World War II because it's too late to prevent that war. And that's the danger, that America disengage, pull back home, and there's no alternative big power or group of countries that can play the same role to help stabilize the international order. So we need a really strong economy and scientific base for our military technology. That's reason one. And we need enough consensus to undergird this American commitment to a global role and a strong international leadership role, because I think the world doesn't hold together nearly as well without us.